I never thought I would find myself talking about Benny Blanco being criticized by parts of the gay community, but here we are. The situation has sparked a surprisingly interesting conversation about privacy, boundaries, sexuality, and the way people communicate with one another, especially when personal questions become public entertainment. Before getting into the controversy itself, I have to admit that Benny Blanco has been giving people plenty to talk about lately for another reason entirely. He has been talking about eating pizza regularly while working toward his weight loss goals, and apparently wants to prove that people can enjoy foods they love while still changing their lifestyle. I honestly find the whole pizza situation hilarious because pizza is one of those foods that I could probably eat far more often than I should. I have always loved a good chicken and barbecue pizza with extra barbecue sauce, especially when there is ranch involved. Hawaiian pizza is another one I enjoy, although I probably could not eat as much of it as some other varieties. I also have a homemade pizza recipe that I absolutely love. I start with ready-made pizza dough, spread tomato sauce over it, add seasoned ground beef, and then load it with cheese. After that comes the part that makes it different from a typical pizza: onions, garlic, and thinly sliced potatoes. I add even more cheese on top before baking everything together. The result is honestly incredible, and I would happily recommend it to anyone who enjoys experimenting with homemade pizza. But enough about pizza, because the real story involves Benny Blanco, influencer and podcaster Jake Shane, and a question that immediately caught people's attention. During an appearance on Benny's podcast, Jake Shane was asked about whether he identifies as a top, bottom, or versatile person. Jake responded to the question while making it clear that he has a specific preference and does not consider himself versatile. The exchange was casual, but because the subject involved someone's intimate preferences, it quickly became a topic of discussion online. That is where things became interesting for me. I understand why some people were uncomfortable with the question. Sexual preferences are personal. They are part of someone's private life, and not everyone feels comfortable discussing them publicly, especially when the person asking is not someone they are romantically or intimately involved with. At the same time, I did not personally interpret Benny's question as malicious. I did not see it as an attempt to embarrass Jake or humiliate him. To me, it appeared to be a casual question asked during a conversation where the subject came up naturally. Jake also seemed capable of handling the situation himself, and I thought he responded confidently. Still, I understand why the conversation has divided people. There is a major difference between discussing something privately with someone you are dating and asking a stranger or public figure about it for entertainment. That distinction matters. When two people are considering a relationship, communicating about compatibility can be important. People have different preferences, boundaries, and expectations, and those things can affect whether a relationship works. I have personally experienced how important that kind of communication can be. I am naturally a very open person, and I have never been someone who believes every personal subject needs to be treated like a forbidden topic. I can laugh about certain things, talk openly about my experiences, and answer questions without automatically assuming someone is trying to offend me. But I also recognize that everyone does not have the same personality. Some people are extremely private. Some people feel uncomfortable discussing intimacy even with close friends. Others are completely comfortable talking about it. Neither approach is automatically wrong. The important thing is respecting someone's boundaries. That is why I think the Benny Blanco situation is more complicated than simply saying that he did something terrible or that people are being overly sensitive. I can understand both sides. I also think the conversation exposes an interesting double standard. People sometimes assume that asking gay men about their sexual preferences is harmless because homosexuality itself has become more visible in popular culture. But being open about someone's identity does not mean being entitled to their private information. A person's sexuality does not automatically make every question about their intimate life acceptable. At the same time, I think people sometimes become so focused on policing conversations that they forget context matters. There is a huge difference between maliciously targeting someone and asking a question that someone else considers inappropriate. For me, Benny's question falls more into the second category. I do not believe this incident is enough to define Benny Blanco as a bad person, and I certainly do not think it is some career-ending scandal. I also do not believe Jake Shane needs to be portrayed as a victim who cannot speak for himself. He handled the situation, answered in the way he wanted to answer, and continued with the conversation. What I found most interesting was how quickly the internet transformed a short exchange into a much bigger cultural discussion. People began debating whether straight men should ask gay men these kinds of questions. Others argued that it was simply curiosity and that there was nothing wrong with discussing sexuality openly. Some people found the question funny, while others felt it crossed a line. Personally, I think the answer depends heavily on the relationship between the people involved. If I am dating someone, I believe conversations about compatibility are important. I would rather understand someone's expectations early than discover months later that we have completely different ideas about what we want from a relationship. I have actually learned that lesson through my own experiences. There was one guy I dated who initially seemed like exactly the kind of person I would be attracted to. He was masculine, kind, thoughtful, and incredibly attentive. He was the type of person who made an effort to impress someone when dating, and I noticed how much care he put into spending time with me. We became friends before anything serious happened between us, and that friendship was actually one of the best parts of the relationship. He would wait for me, take me to movies, take me out to dinner, and generally make me feel appreciated. He came into my life during a difficult period, especially when I was recovering from a painful breakup, and his kindness meant a lot to me. I also tend to take my time before becoming intimate with someone. I have always believed in getting to know a person first, rather than rushing into something simply because there is attraction. With him, we spent a lot of time together without immediately crossing that line. We could spend the night together, watch movies, cuddle, and enjoy each other's company without making intimacy the center of everything. Eventually, however, we had to confront the reality that we had different preferences. That experience taught me something important. Attraction and compatibility are not always the same thing. You can genuinely care about someone. You can enjoy their personality, appreciate how they treat you, and feel incredibly comfortable around them, but still discover that the relationship does not work romantically. In our case, the situation ultimately brought us closer as friends rather than partners. I knew that I could not force myself into something that did not feel natural simply because the other person cared deeply about me. That is why I believe communication matters. Everyone is different. Some people are strict about their preferences, while others are much more flexible. Some people are comfortable discussing those preferences openly, while others would rather keep them completely private. And that brings me back to Benny Blanco and Jake Shane. I personally do not think Benny was trying to cause harm. I also think Jake handled the moment well. But I can understand why someone else might watch that exchange and feel uncomfortable with the question. Both reactions can exist at the same time. We can acknowledge that a question was probably not asked with bad intentions, while also recognizing that it might not have been the best question to ask publicly. I think that is a much healthier way to look at situations like this than immediately trying to cancel someone. There is also another stereotype that I think deserves attention. People sometimes assume that someone's appearance, personality, voice, or mannerisms automatically reveal their intimate preferences. I have never believed that. A feminine man is not automatically a bottom. A masculine man is not automatically a top. Someone who appears confident or dominant might have completely different preferences privately. Someone who seems shy or feminine might surprise people entirely. People are individuals, and stereotypes cannot tell us everything about them. That is why I would never make assumptions about someone's private life based on how they look or behave. At the end of the day, I think the Benny Blanco controversy is less about whether Benny should be canceled and more about how we approach conversations involving other people's boundaries. Curiosity is natural. Humor is natural. Talking openly about sexuality can also be healthy. But respect has to remain part of the conversation. If someone is comfortable answering a personal question, that is their choice. If someone does not want to answer, that choice deserves the same respect. In my own life, I have always been more open than most people. I can laugh at myself, talk about experiences that other people might consider embarrassing, and have conversations that some people would rather avoid. But being comfortable with my own personal information does not mean everyone else has to be equally comfortable. That distinction is important. So, when I look at what happened between Benny Blanco and Jake Shane, I do not see some huge scandal. I see a moment that created a larger conversation about boundaries, sexuality, privacy, and the different ways people react to personal questions. I thought Jake handled himself well, and I do not think Benny Blanco suddenly deserves to be labeled a terrible person because of one question. At the same time, I think this is a good reminder that even casual questions can become uncomfortable when they involve someone's private life, especially when millions of people are watching. For me, the biggest takeaway is simple. People should be allowed to have their preferences, their boundaries, and their own comfort levels without being judged for them. And honestly, that is what makes all of us different. I can be completely open about certain things, while someone else may want to keep those same things private. Neither person is necessarily wrong. So, I am not looking at this situation as Benny Blanco being canceled. I am looking at it as another example of the internet taking one short moment and turning it into a much bigger conversation. And maybe that conversation is not necessarily a bad thing. Because sometimes the most interesting discussions begin with something as simple as one personal question. In this case, that question just happened to involve Benny Blanco, Jake Shane, and a topic that many people consider deeply private. And that is exactly why the internet has been talking about it.